Being happy, engaged, and productive is not only about doing what you love, but also being the person who you love in yourself. Welcome to the 360 Degrees Growth Podcast. Here you learn about leading authentically. You'll hear stories from leaders about leading authentically at home, work, and community, and how that led them to a fulfilling and prosperous life. Welcome to a new episode of 360 Degrees Growth Podcast, your Leading Authentically podcast. Today we have Sam Shriver, Executive Vice President of Thought Leadership and Training Transfer at the Center for Leadership Studies. Sam, how are you?
I'm very good, Zahi. Thank you very much for having me. Looking forward to this.
Thank you. Well, I'm honored to have you. And to get started, why don't you tell us a little bit about you and what you do at the Center for Leadership Studies?
Just academically, I got a Bachelor of Science in Engineering from the United States Coast Guard Academy, MBA from Pepperdine, and then got my doctorate in training and development at NC State. In 1983, I went to work at the Center for Leadership Studies for Dr. Paul Hersey. Spent 3 years there, left in 1986, and started a company called Performance Impact with my wife, Maureen, and sort of wandered around in the desert, for lack of a better term, for about 25 years. And in 2011, Performance Impact and the Center for Leadership Studies actually merged. So came back to where it all started, and currently have the honor of working with the team at the Center for Leadership Studies with all things situational leadership. So that's kind of the 45-second version of a 45-year career.
Wonderful. Our topic today is the Center for Leadership Studies, known for its model, a situational leadership model. And our conversation is, how can people lead authentically using this model? So before we get started, why don't you tell us a little bit about the situational leadership methodology and how it can help leaders out there?
Well, and by the way, for anybody that's viewing this, in case you get lost, you'll notice that over my right shoulder, I have the situational leadership model, and actually on my chest. I didn't plan it this way, but so I could actually go through a demo, with my shirt here or over my shoulder. But yeah, it's an interesting thing. It's because there's very few models, very few businesses from that standpoint that have been around for over 50 years. But situational leadership, Dr. Hersey developed situational leadership in the late 1960s at Ohio University. And really what he did is he integrated, the works of, pioneering researchers in both leadership and, motivation and employee development. And it's kind of weird, how like you look back at history and you go, well, that didn't make sense. What were they doing? Well, they didn't know any better. But leadership was studied on a track that was separate and distinct from motivation, employee development, all of that sort of thing. So the work of Abraham Maslow and Frederick Herzberg and Chris Argyris with, maturity, immaturity theory, those studies were taking place at the same time that Frederick Winslow Taylor was developing scientific management, and Elton Mayo was developing human relations theory. And really the first 4-box model in our industry's history came out of Ohio State and Michigan, where in the 1950s, they tried to figure out, okay, what is the best leadership style? That's the top part of our model. What should leaders do? Should they be autocratic or should they be democratic? And that study had 2 basic questions. Was the leader in question successful? Did they hit productivity targets? Was the leader in question effective? Did people enjoy the experience? Would they work for that leader again? And the answer that came out of that study, what's the best style, was irrefutably, it depends. Because there were leaders that were autocratic that were both successful and effective. There were leaders that were democratic that were both successful and effective. And way back in the 1950s, they also developed this style where leaders didn't do too much of anything. At the time, they called it the laissez-faire leadership style. In our terminology, it would be a leader that was low on task and low on relationship behavior, but the common terms associated with that are empowerment or delegation. So Dr. Hersey was really one of the first people that came up with what is referred to, I think, in the literature as a contingency model. What you do is a function of the task and the people that are doing it. So there's no such thing as a best style. There's no such thing as a worst style. They all work, they all don't. It's a matter of when you do what. So in that regard, I've always viewed situational leadership as a timing mechanism. If you read the tea leaves correctly, if you're cue sensitive to the right things, if you spend enough time, figuring out in specific terms, what is the task and what is the ability and willingness of the individual that I'm leading to perform that task, that leads you in a direction of a style that is either directive or empowering or a more relationship collaborative approach. In our terminology, a style 2 or a style 3. And I think, Zahi, how can a model possibly still be relevant today when it was developed 50 years ago? Because obviously leadership is a lot different. And certainly it's employed differently and it's used differently, today than it was, back in the 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s. But no matter how much diversity sort of complicates your leadership environment, or how much disruptive change enters into that scenario, you're always going to have a task. You're always going to have somebody that's going to perform it, and you're always going to have options as a leader of whether you should provide direction or empowerment or discussion or participation. So I think there are certain elements of leadership, and I would suggest situational leadership is one of them, that are sort of just foundational pieces of influence. So that to me is why situational leadership was relevant globally, back in the 1970s, and remains relevant today.
So if you tell us a little bit about, I know the components of situational leadership: task, performance readiness, and leadership style. Why don't you tell us about how do they work together?
Well, the first step that the leader needs to determine, and this sounds a lot easier than it is, but it's really to identify what is the task, like in its lowest possible common denominator terms. What is the task, or what is the outcome? What is it I'm trying to influence? And when I say that sounds easier than it is, a lot of times when you're dealing with people, for a lot of different reasons, they don't tell you the truth. They're not upfront about where they're coming from, how much experience they have with something, how confident they are to perform it, all of those different kinds of things. So once you identify the task, your next set, or the next thing you do as a situational leader is to determine, what is the performance readiness of, as you mentioned, of the individual performing that task. And traditionally, I think that was sort of something the leader did by him or herself. You went off to leadership training, you learned situational leadership and maybe a lot of other things. Then you came back, and what you did was you made all of these determinations. I think in this day and age, the whole idea of performance readiness, it's something where you need to align with the people you're influencing around what their readiness is. And what that entails is them being active participants in the leadership equation. So it's not just them standing there, or sitting there and waiting for you to make all these determinations. And it's like they're actively involved or engaged in that process. And we have a program that we have specifically, developed, and this isn't a commercial, but because I think there's a lot of leadership training that is moving in this direction, but it targets individual contributors. And it's about, our program is about getting people to own their own performance readiness. It's called situational performance ownership. And so if worldwide levels of engagement hover around 30%, which is, and they've been there since we've started measuring it. Organizations can deploy program after program after initiative to try to increase engagement, in their company or in their organization. And I think the question that many of us ask, Marshall Goldsmith was the first person that I ever heard ask it, is, well, what responsibility do those people have for their own engagement? So if you're not engaged, why are you just sitting there waiting for some miracle? Why don't you get in the game and align around the work that needs to be done with your supervisor, become an active part of that negotiation and discussion on your performance readiness, so that you're getting what you need, from your leader to help make you more productive and to also enhance your engagement, but also so you can maximize your opportunity to learn and to grow. So first step is task. Second step is, what is the performance readiness? And that's a far more collaborative process today than it has been historically. And then if you do, and Zahi, I've always thought this, if you do the first steps right, first two steps, the third step is so much simpler, right? It's so much more easy. Like, if you really know that somebody for a particular task is low on task-related knowledge, experience, and skill, and is low on task-related confidence, commitment, and motivation, well, doesn't it make complete and total sense that you need to be directive with that person? You need to give that person the benefit of your experience to, at a minimum, create movement, to get them moving in the right direction of performance. And on the opposite side of the continuum, if you really know that somebody knows what they're doing, has done it before, has experience with it, enjoys it, has a tremendous amount of confidence, could do it with their eyes closed in many cases, well, doesn't it make sense that what you would do is empower them or delegate to them and just say, keep doing what you're doing? And obviously, if somebody is in between those two extremes, they're not a novice, they're not an expert, they're someplace in between, well, then you need to be someplace in between direction and empowerment. That's where the participation and collaboration and our high relationship styles, high relationship behavior comes in. Yes. So step one is task. Step two is performance readiness. And step three is match your approach as a leader to the performance readiness of the follower. Our fourth step, and people don't get into that as much, but it's also very important, is which way is the person moving? Are they developing or are they regressing? Are they moving in our model from right to left, or are they moving from left to right? And both dynamics are very natural, very normal. So in terms of people, when they're learning something, that's different than when they know how to do it and have become sick and tired of doing it, or they've lost motivation for whatever reason, or lost confidence for whatever reason. You handle those dynamics differently based on the flow of development or regression.
Wonderful. I love how you said active engagement and having that active discussion about performance and performance readiness. I remember my first managerial job, I would say, and I came in all enthusiastic about how to lead people. And one way I was like, I'm going to be fair. I'm going to be, treat people equally. So I'm going to treat everybody the same. And, short time after, I realized that's not the right way to do it. In order for me to get the best out of my people, I have to adjust my style based on them, based on where they at in their development, where they at in their knowledge about the task, and their not only knowledge, behavior, and the skills that they have on that specific task. And my background is in sales and marketing. Thank you for listening to our 360 Degrees Growth podcast. If you'd like to know more about situational leadership training, please email us at info@consulting360d.com. So yes, soon enough, I had to adjust. And that's way before my time of knowing the situational leadership model and how effective it was. So situational leadership, adjusting my style based on not only the task, but also the performance readiness of the people or the person I'm leading or the people I'm leading. That comes to question because we're talking about authenticity and authentic leadership. Um, how can a person be authentic? And that's a question, of course, of consistency versus flexibility, right?
Yeah.
How can I be authentic when I'm changing my style every day? How do they play together? I mean, it feels like it's their paradoxes. It feels like their polarities.
Yeah, no, and maybe just one quick comment on your experience. I don't think it's that much different than, a lot of people that get into management. They have no idea how hard it is. When you ask, most people, like, why'd you get into management? They look at you like, well, like it was a progression, right? I mean, it's like, that's how I made more money. That's how and the responsibility of helping others get better, is so much more different than the responsibility as an individual contributor to hit your objectives and to do them, to whatever those objectives may be, sales, manufacturing, administration, whatever it is. But managing people, let's just say this with a straight face, it's a tough thing. If it wasn't difficult, then so many more people would be good at it. And I think in our class, our baseline class where we teach new managers the situational leadership experience, our SLE program, there is consistently, and we talk a lot about it at the Center for Leadership Studies, there's these aha moments that first-time managers get. And it really speaks to the essence of your consistency versus flexibility question, because it's sort of like, if you view management as, okay, I'm going to manage this way. This is how I'm going to be. And everyone will know this. There will be consistency and they will know what to expect from me, and that is good. What that fails to consider is what those people need in their development for whatever tasks they're performing. And when you think about it, as a leader, the absolute most inconsistent thing you can do is to treat everyone the same. That sounds weird, but it's, just run it through your own, memory.
Yeah.
Does it make sense to treat a high performer that knows what they're doing and loves doing it the same way that you would treat an employee that was a real problem on your team? Somebody that was negative, and somebody that didn't try, and somebody that, of course not. It fails by comparison. So the big aha that a lot of people get when they go through situational leadership, not unlike your example, is, okay, so that's why my approach with this person for this task works, and that same approach with another person for the same task doesn't. It's like, if I really want to reach that person, what I need to do is treat them differently for that task until they get to the same point of performance or same level of performance as this other person. It's also like another thing that we talk a lot about in our programs is, people don't fit into these boxes. Like, we have performance levels 1, 2, 3, and 4. Well, people don't fit into those boxes. People fit into those boxes depending upon what you want them to do, depending upon what their responsibility is. So you mentioned as a sales manager, there's some salespeople that I've come across that love the customer interaction part of what they do and are very, very good at it. If you put them in front of a customer, they can articulate the product benefits, respond to competitive obstacles, close business or make a meaningful advance, handle obstacles. They love that interaction part. Mm-hmm. Take the same salesperson and ask them to fill out data in Salesforce or to do some sort of administrative thing. You get a completely different combination of ability and willingness. So for task one, you just say, yeah, get out there and get it done. For task two, in many cases, you have to stand there, watch them, help them, force them, to complete, the administrative task. So the whole idea of consistency and flexibility is so important. There is no such thing as an approach. There is no such thing as a way to do it. Flip side of the coin, where should leaders be consistent? I think that's a great point. Well, leaders should always listen. Leaders should always pay attention. They should always be very focused on the people. They should be very cue sensitive. They should be curious. Leaders should always include people. They should always have an approach that says, I'm interested in what you have to say. I want you to be a part of this team. I want you to grow and develop. I want you to know transparently why I do what I do. Okay. And just sort of let's talk about that. Let's have a discussion, around the approaches that I take as a leader or a coach or even as a parent. So I think consistency wise, I think leaders tell the truth. There is no situational ethics. How much of that truth you tell is in some cases, that comes into play. But leaders, good leaders, they tell the truth. Good leaders listen. Good leaders always include people. But in terms of the style or the approach that they bring to the feast, I think good leaders adjust based on who they're dealing with and what the particulars are.
I love that. And part of authentic leadership is high integrity, leading with values and having a purpose. And I see that there is absolute no contradiction whatsoever in adjusting a person's styles, because again, this model is about about the performance, and we say that it's performer driven, right? So there's absolutely, in order to help those performers to be at their best, we have to adjust and meet them where they're at. And I love that. Two more questions.
Sure.
One of them is, what advice would you give to up and coming leaders? What would you tell them to be more authentic?
Yeah, I think the main thing, the primary thing that drives successful leaders, regardless of what style they're using, is to invest in others. Is to build, in our terms, referent power or trust. Whether you're an individual contributor or a manager or a senior manager, every single day, every single interaction, everything you do, you need to do it on the basis of, how am I enhancing my reputation and my relationship and the degree of trust that I have with the people that I influence. And I think sometimes it's an interesting question, like, well, how do you lead people if you don't have trust? Because there's so many managers out there in the world of work, they're given, here's your new job, and you show up day one, and of course people don't know you. How are they going to trust you? Well, I think if you don't have trust, a really good way to build it is to match your approach to the performance needs of the people, that you're dealing with. So you can use situational leadership to build trust. We define leadership as an attempt to influence. We define power as influence potential. And the more trust you have with your people, with the people you're trying to influence, the higher the probability that you're going to be successful when it comes time to use any one of the four styles. So I think if you're an up and coming leader, be curious. Like take a look at role models, people that we exercise that everybody in the world does, in leadership training in one form or fashion, is think of the best leader you ever had. What did that person do? Well, it's pretty simple what they did, but they did it with meaning. They did it with conviction. They did it for you. Those things are not really difficult to identify, but in many cases, they're very difficult to do. But I would say if you aspire to be a leader, pick some role models out. Ask what those people did, and then look in the mirror and say, how good am I at those things, at helping others, at investing in others, in building trust with others. So that's something that I think, if I was an aspiring leader in this day and age, which I, by the way, am, that's something that I would really, try to focus upon.
My last question is it's a little bit personal. What's one thing that helped you grow and transform as a leader?
One thing that helped me grow and transform as a leader is making mistakes, well-intended mistakes, and really looking back on them and identifying what I did wrong, and not from a regret standpoint or whatever. I don't have guilt or a lot of it. It's kind of like you're in the situations that you're in and you do what you do, and sometimes you got to go back and apologize. But to get in the game, to not sit on the sidelines, and that's really why a lot of people, I think, they don't get into leadership in any form or fashion. They're afraid of failure, and as Brene Brown says, they're afraid of being judged. And so when you lead, you have to dive into those circumstances at whatever level it happens to be, recognizing that's going to happen. You might fail, and you most assuredly will be judged. But to accept that responsibility, to go in and to really take a look at the results that you get or don't get, and the impact that you have on people, whether it's positive or negative, and take a step back and say, what could I have done differently? How could I improve? Let's just make sure I don't make that mistake again. And I've made I've made egregious mistakes.
We all have.
You look back on them and you go, what in the world were you thinking? And the answer was evidently not much. But then you give yourself a break and you move on and you say, well, I'm not going to do that again. I promise myself I won't do that again. So that would be the one thing off the top of my head that I would suggest.
Great. Sam, thank you so much for being on this podcast. Hopefully we'll have another conversation some other time. Too bad that the time is up. Thank you so much. And I'm pretty sure people who are listening to this or watching this can reach you on social media. So much appreciated. And it's really a pleasure to have you.
Yeah, if any of your listeners, and I do appreciate the opportunity, and thank you and your team for putting it on, but if anybody does have any questions about this or anything else, we're at situational.com and would love to entertain those inquiries. So thank you very much, Zahi. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Have a great day. Thank you for listening to our 360 Degrees Growth Podcast. If you like our podcast, please make sure to follow our channel. Also, please like and share our episodes on social media.